It is now time for the Port Podcast. In 3, 2, 1, welcome everybody to a very special Port Days podcast episode. We are so excited. We have JC Chartrand here, and we are so excited to see you. Welcome to the Port Podcast.
Excellent.
Are you excited to be here?
I'm so excited, not even funny.
Well, it's been a long time coming to get you on the show. Oh, really? Highly requested. Absolutely.
Okay.
Highly requested. I've been very excited for this. So you have an extensive history in shipping and logistics. Can you tell us a little bit about what led to your work with DP World Canada?
Yes. So for all of us that work in this industry, first of all, you get addicted to this business.
Yeah, I could see
So
that.
hard to quit after. So when I started in 1971, so it's been quite a while.
He was very young.
I was very young, and I wanted to be a police officer, not in shipping. So I applied, and by the time I got my okay to go to the police academy, I had started with the railroad, with CN Rail. So ended up 44 years with them. Most of my career was, I think more than half of it was covering Asia and the Middle East. And, of course, you develop relationships. And when it came time to retire, hard to go from 100 miles per hour to zero. So I wanted to stay in the business, and DP World wanted me to join them. So I accepted to join them and be a spokesperson, a guide, a coach to the younger generation, and work with colleagues like Craig and promote St. John as an example. So that's how I got here.
I can attest, JC. You and I have got to know each other now over the last 7-8 years in your work with the Port of St. John, and you are kind of the most incredible connector that we've ever seen in St. John, and the way you build relationships is something that we all admire and watch. And I just want to give our listeners a perspective. When Kate said we wanted to have JC on this podcast, he's kind of like a legendary figure in our circles in St. John and beyond. And I got to tell a quick anecdotal story that speaks to your reach. There's a major conference that I believe we've talked about on this podcast called the Trans-Pacific Maritime, TPM, in Long Beach every year. And the very first time as CEO, I was able to go out. It was right after the pandemic. We were still being tested to get in the gates. And my colleague Andrew Dixon and I sat with JC outside of the convention center. And I'm new to this. I haven't met a lot of people. I'm new to the container world. In my previous role at the port, I didn't touch on business development as much as I do now. And what I was just in amazement of, I'm not sure we got to talk very long. People would just come by, JC, and it was so personal the way they interacted with you. It wasn't even just about logistics. It was about your family and their family and what's going on in their life. And tell us a little bit about relationships being the core of you.
Well, I think that you make a choice in life, I guess. And in fact, a funny anecdote with this team. Last year at Port Days, we had the lobster fiesta. Fiesta. And one of the ladies kept taking pictures of me. And she said, well, you're the one, you're always smiling, and people are coming to you and they're smiling, so we're taking pictures of you. I said, okay, that's fine, whatever.
That's true. Full circle.
Yeah, full circle. It's funny, eh?
Yeah,
it's
good memory.
Amazing how things go. But seriously, I think that we don't know all of it. We don't know all of our business. Mm-hmm. But the global team knows. And what we have to do is always try to coach and help somebody else. And I think over the years, the ease of being able to approach a person, the ease to, and guide them, I think is something that I've developed. And I guess it proved itself. Like, I spent a lot of time in Asia, and one of the few guys that my boss would say, why are they bowing to us and they're hugging you and that's not supposed to happen? Well, it's something that happens to you at one point in time. People get so close to you, but it's a lot of work. There's it's like a garden relationship. You got to water it. You got to take the bad weeds because not everybody's nice, and you got to fertilize it. And people then respect you. And in fact, I was on the call with somebody a couple of seconds ago, and that I only met this year at TPM. Yeah. And we've been interacting, and it's sometimes there's a way to talk to people that allows them to feel secure in approaching you.
How do you dedicate the hours in the run of a day to build those? Because I know you and I would converse, if not once a week, once every 10 days, but I'm only one person you do that with. How do you manage your time? And you're part-time now too as an advisor with DP after 40 plus years with CN. How do you find the time and remembering to touch base with someone in key moments?
Yes. And that's probably one of the biggest things. Remembering, because people will not be always calling you. Again, back to that garden issue, is that you also have to call people. Take 2 seconds. Because they're also caught in their world. And sometimes you need a breather. You're no different. Like we're very fortunate to have Craig as the president of the port here. He's a very active person. Very, always on the go. But when you call him and you calm things down, I call it group therapy. We do. Sometimes you need to have these moments. But for me, calling people. So you have a list of names that in your head or in your whatever type of agenda you've got. And, I've not spoken to them in a while. Mm-hmm. And then they feel honored that you called them. Like I feel honored when somebody calls me. The thing is that, though, to build this, like you work from 9 to 5 and you build your relationships from 5 to 9. And that's hard when you're married, you got to spend a lot of time on the road. Mm-hmm. But you build these things. You build the trust. And I think it pays off. Not easy. And sometimes, I have this to do, but no. Time out, I got to do this. But over time, you respect people. If you respect people, people will respect you most of the time.
Now, speaking of people, you have worked with some incredible industry leaders like Keith Creel, Hunter Harrison, and the list could go on, believe me, for pages. Could you share a little bit about some of your most memorable moments working with some of these people?
Hunter used to call me, sometime he would have these significant emotional event meetings. Which was not good.
I have those
which was not good. If the meeting started by that phrase, it was going to be not easy.
Say that, a significant emotional event. We gotta write that down.
I did. See.
So that was not going to be good. So, but still, I think that you get to meet people that are talkers, but then there's people that are thinkers, doers, and I think the evolution, first of all, Canada has evolved a lot. We were not on the world stage for the longest time. And I think that, in the last 30, 40 years, logistics, transportation, things have changed. We're part of a huge global supply chain pattern, and we've taken our place. We're fortunate to have tidal waters. North, east, west. We have great St. Lawrence River access. We're very fortunate. But how to manage all these resources? I think in the case of the railroad, I'll talk CN and CP, now CPKC, but in the days of CP, same challenges, a bit different scenario, but there are some significant events, one of which was not my hiring at CN, but later on, I think in the early 80s, the Staggers Act in the U.S. To deregulate the railroad, which was followed by Canada to do the same, allowed for railroads to become much more participant in the supply chain. Trucks were taking over the business, and the railroad, there was a bunch of hundreds of small railroads, and then it created the Class 1 type of railroad, the big railroad, and it was the start of a change. But the problem we had at CN, we were federally owned. And it was not a problem, but the issue was not to make money, but to get Canada going. But at one point in time, you can't keep throwing money at something. And the decision was made to privatize the company. And so in 95, I think. So that was a pivotal moment where we saw leadership at CN take over. Mr. Tellier was the first president at the IPO. I remember his speech saying, boys and girls, and I'll come back to girls in a sec, we need to make $1 profit this year. That's the only thing he was asking for. And which we did. Hunter Harrison became the CEO as we had acquired this railroad, the Illinois Central. And he started to shake things up, but not in a bad way, make us think different. And we went from the worst railroad in North America, because after Mr. Tellier left, Mr. Harrison took over, and then that's where the drastic change happened. I know for people it's not something you would know, but gate reservation, long trains, everything changed. And it's fact, we set the stage for all the other Class 1 carriers to do the same in North America. Mm-hmm. And then, but these changes bring turmoil. Turmoil bring upset customers, upset government, upset. So you have to, at one point in time, calm down. And then we kept going. Mr. Mongeau took over and to rebalance the clock. But the stage was set. And from there on, Mr. Creel became our CEO and then he went to CP. And Mr. Creel brought the discipline. Because you can have all the changes you want, and Mr. Harrison had all the vision of changes.
Right.
But how do you
If they're not adopted, it's not not efficient.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And railroading is a dangerous sport.
Yeah.
It's an outside sport. It's very, very demanding on resources. People don't realize, but it's not that easy to be a train conductor, train engineer. I mean, these people go through hard training. They have to know their rules. They have to requalify. It's a challenging world. And the other pivotal moment, when I started in the railroad, there was no woman in it as blue collars worker. They were all office people. And they changed. We started slowly. In fact, even in the office in the remote areas, we had no female workers. So it started to change and bring, I don't want to use the word sanity, but it started to control, get a better view and more dexterity, more vision of how we could do things different. So that was another pivotal moment. And then Mr. Mongeau, then Mr. Louet was the CMO, became the CEO. And now, prime example, you've got two CEOs in North America that are female, Mrs. Robinson and Mrs. Farmer. So proves a point that you go from when I started, there was none. I mean, there was something that could not be visualized. To today, two of the leaders are female leaders. So, so it's amazing, but it takes the labor, the union to, I wouldn't say embrace it all the time because they do have to represent their members. But at the same time, being more efficient brings more work, brings more job. I mean, at the end of the day, it's a vicious cycle. It just brings more and more opportunity for workforce. So maybe I talk too much.
No. Can I touch on one thing?
Yes.
So you obviously working through the 70s and 80s, you were government government controlled with CN. And now we look at railways with, Warren Buffett's comments on BNSF, and railroads have become extremely profitable. Most Canadians would own CN and CP in a pension fund or a portfolio, or some type.
They don't even know, but
they don't even know they own it. If they're a teacher or a police officer in their pension funds, they'd have a significant holding of these companies. They became so profitable in North America, and you look at the European model where rail is passenger primarily and freight second. We're the opposite in North America. It's freight first, passenger second. Some would debate that's a little unfortunate for passengers, but the freight side is so lucrative. What were the big, you've talked a little bit about the cultural transition. What were some of the big drivers to become that profitable that quickly?
Well, first of all, passengers versus freight, the geographic
That's important.
issues about America. I mean, you go to deal with your European colleagues and you say, well, it takes like 4 days from Toronto to Vancouver. I mean, you would have gone to cross Europe and back, about 12 countries and back before to do the same. So for passenger makes sense, but for freight, maybe not. Yeah. But
Interesting.
The other advantage, and people sometimes, they say, oh, the railroads, when you're using, and I don't want to create a dilemma with trucking and everything else, but they use public roads. We all pay for paving a road, and the trucks, they damage and whatever. Railroad take care of their own track bed. Right. They take care of their own infrastructure. Of course, they get grants for whatever project that will impact a community, but in reality, there's very little investment from public to manage the railroad. What the railroad became good at, again, I'm going to come back to Mr. Harrison to say, they got out of their roots of always doing things the same way. I'll give you the example of double stacking containers. Mm-hmm. So that started in the 80s. So why would you be pulling a train with single stack containers, at the time, 6,000 feet, where you could put two high because you're still lower than a multi-vehicle for a car carrier for automobiles, and double the number of containers without doing anything except adding a little bit more motive hours because now you have a bit more weight. That makes sense. But so that was one of the change on the automotive side, on the intermodal side. Then Mr. Harrison came in with, so why are we running 6,000 feet? Why are we not running, it's our track, 8,000 feet, 10,000 feet? Right. So he pushed that envelope. And as we would go longer and longer, everybody else was trying to do that. But people don't realize that in America, most of the railroads have long stretches of single stack. People think it's a double lane highway all across, but it's too hard to maintain.
Let's zero in on Hunter Harrison before we lose that thought for a second, because such an influential figure. Yep. Many books written about him, some that I've been told to read, and I've read one of them, Railroader, recently. So, you kind of touched on it in two of your answers. How big of an imprint has Hunter had on the industry? CN, CP, CSX, CEO, but people like, Larry Foote, or James Foote, sorry, and all these different figures became CEOs themselves. Keith, Creel.
Because I think Mr. Harrison, not only he imposed the changes, but I mean, he was thinking of changes, but he forced us to ourselves think about changes. Mm-hmm. So, because certainly you could not be looking at something and just not think different about it. Right. You had to, if he could see it different, why are you? So I think we had the term hunter. We got hunterized because every time, and as I joined DP World, I could see at a terminal, let's say in Vancouver, why are you doing it this way? So I think Hunter's role was to be a mentor in forcing us to think different. Why should he be the one having all the ideas? Yeah, I mean, we're all paid to do that in all of our work. Like you come up with ideas, and that's what it is, to push that envelope all the time. Right. And I think, and then he had all these other steps that, were they all successful? I would say 95%. Some couldn't work for government reason, for whatever reason, but in general it worked. Yeah.
So let's just bring this back to St. John for 1 second. So Kate and I had an opportunity late last year in a really remarkable podcast. We had Jonathan Waba on, who I know is a friend and colleague, former colleague of yours,
colleague of mine.
At CN. Who's now a vice president at CPKC and has been very involved in the St. John program. So you and Jonathan and many others, I want to, Sean McMahon, your colleague, others have been, is also a CN colleague of back in the day. You guys have been very involved in the commercial side of growing St. John. You obviously from the time DP World came in, and then Jonathan and his team in the 2020 period when CPKC came back to St. John. Jonathan described a lot of the value proposition for his network, and I know we do connect into two other Class 1 railways you can talk about in a minute, but from CPKC's standpoint, he just mentioned the connectivity inland and really targeting that hinterland, Toronto West type of area. So from your perspective as both a railroader and a senior advisor at DP World, where do you see the value proposition for St. John?
Well, first of all, I think that COVID, in fact, when Mrs. Krisha Freeland came to St. John, we talked about the supply chain issues. And COVID proved to us, especially on the coal supply chain, the weaknesses that our Canadian supply chain has, because we don't have enough port of entries. So we have to rely on American port of entries. Well, we could do not only Canadian cargo, but U.S. cargo through, say, St. John. Mm-hmm. And now you have a carrier, in the case of CPKC, that goes from here and can Montreal, Toronto, Chicago, and then south, Kansas City. People don't. Sometimes we lose track of the capacity and the capabilities of railroads. Railroads they have this amazing network. And so you get this now, you can be what we call single line all the way down to the heart of the U.S. Same thing with CN. But in fact, with CP, now you CPKC into Mexico, sometimes it's the same customer. So now they're a Mexican customer, but suddenly they say, well, we have produce that comes up the coast of the U.S. from east coast of Mexico up the U.S. East coast that and technically could make it to St. John and become one of those privy to a new option for a supply chain, like for the grocery store.
Mm-hmm.
We have grocery stores here today watching this because they also found out during COVID that they had challenges.
We have them at this conference.
They're at this
talking to everyone. This is a big deal for us.
So for me, CPKC's they could, and by the way, they could see it. So they used to have that line. They sold it, and when Mr. Creel saw DP World, because when you have an outfit like DP World taking possession of a terminal, they're not gonna. We did not buy this to leave it the way it was. Mm-hmm. So he saw the opportunity to have access to tidal water for his railroad, for his customers, and that's how it happens.
So I'm curious, we've talked about the evolution of the past, improvement of the last 30 to 40 years. Yep. I would be curious to know about what you see as an opportunity for the next. Because I'm sure that there's some that you have or that you would like to see. I'd be curious what the top one.
So one person I met today talking about the different projects I'm working on. So he says, "You're the future." I said, "No, I'm the old man, but I'm going to get people to think future." We are, when you look, first of all, there's a couple of, first for New Brunswick itself, we have to realize that we have the opportunity to grow jobs here in New Brunswick. We need to have the education system to people in New Brunswick don't even know who we are, what we do. There's great job, well-paying job, white collar, blue collar, high-tech jobs at our terminal, and it's going to continue to grow. So on the job side, but as a terminal itself, when you look at the future, we have systems like Box Bay, which is vertical storage of containers. We're looking at containers, vehicles and containers, a racking of cars instead of rolling them on. We're looking at what we call rotainers, which is basically bulk cargo. It's for the mining industry, but in Canada, I think right now there's 37 permits for new mines to be built in Canada, mostly for export cargo. So moving away from traditional containers to rotainers and traditional gondolas and new technology, St. John can become a gateway for all kinds of product, and which can be served by the 3 Class 1 railroads. They all have access to mine, finished vehicles, all kinds of stuff that they have access to, that they will be able to reach. There's very few, I don't think there's one in Canada that's accessed by 3 railroads. I think Port St. John's the only one that has 3 railroads.
Listen to this. I'm glad we have this filmed. This is, JC's sales pitch. We get to hear it all the time, but I think for our audience, they're gonna be thrilled. First of all, thank you for taking the time. I know your time at this conference is precious. You've organized so many meetings for us, for your colleagues at DP World. I just want to say thank you for taking the time to do this podcast. Like I said earlier, you are the gold standard of relationship building. We know that you're a disruptor. You're an innovator. Yes. You're a great friend of the Port of St. John, and we're thrilled every time we get to see you.
And remember, disruptions bring opportunities. So you have to disrupt all the time.
We've got quotes that we're going to be using for years to come.
For podcast listeners and watchers. You've heard it here first.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you all so much for tuning in and listening, and we hope you enjoyed this episode. Thanks so much for listening.